We're not out there fighting anything other than crime.
We see stuff that nobody should have to see.
Put your hands back! Hands back! Hands back! Go!
Get out of it, Mel. Get out of it! Get out of it!
Don't move! Don't move!
George 31, erect out.
Don't go!
Put it in paper. You're going to jail. Where else do you think you're going?
You're listening to The Beat, profiles of police nationwide. The Beat also applies to federal agents too. They're police too, just on a national level, as we'll talk about tonight. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 265 of the Mike the New Haven podcast. Apologies, I know I'm late. We were supposed to start at 8:30, but run around like a madman. You know, I'm a busy guy, and I like it that way. But I was hustling home. We got lightning coming down here in Connecticut, so I was going the speed limit, but I wanted to make sure I got here in time. And well, you know, I'm fashionably late, as they say. But thanks for bearing with me. And if you haven't checked out the previous episode, that was episode 264, which was another volume of The Beat, volume 4. Bill Hansen, detective with the Tucson, Arizona Police Department in the Homicide Division. Prior to that, U.S. Air Force, really interesting guy, varied career in law enforcement, much like my next guest tonight. So real quick, we'll go through our sponsors. And first up, of course, is Scotty Saul. As electric vehicles become a more frequent sight on the roadways these days, it's important to know what to do in the event that they catch fire. And for firefighters responding to electric vehicle fires, immediate information at that, is imperative. It's a must-have, which is where Scott Saul comes in, because he's created the First Responders EV Rescue app. Again, the First Responders Electric Vehicle Rescue app, which provides on-scene information immediately to safely approach and work on an electric or hybrid vehicle that's caught fire. The more information firefighters have, and the quicker they have it for these type of emergencies, the better. And you can get this app on the Apple App Store, of course, if you have an iPhone, or if you have any other device, mainly an Android. You can get it on Google Play if you go there. What this app does is unique because it not only includes the location of the first, second, and third batteries in an electric vehicle, it also tells you about high voltage fuel cells and cables, ultra high strength steel, jacking and stabilization points, and cable cut areas, and also where you shouldn't cut in the event that you need to extricate somebody out the vehicle. And lastly, high voltage disconnects. So again, that's the EV Rescue app, First Responders EV Rescue app, which you can get on the App Store if you have an iPhone, and Google Play for an Android. Scott Saul created it. He's based out of Deer Park, New York, and this provides immediate information to firefighters responding to electric vehicle fires. All right, now from Scotty to Billy Ryan. The Mike the New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the Elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the Arson and Explosion Squad. So if you need a PI to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require, contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike to New Haven podcast. Bill, of course, as I mentioned before, also the co-executive and co-creator alongside yours truly of another mini-series we have on the show, the first one we ever started, Tales from the Boom Room, profiles of the NYPD's arson, explosion, and bomb squad. And thanks to him and Scotty for their support of the show. All right, my next guest's last name may be strange, but there was nothing peculiar about his career in law enforcement. A special agent with 21 years of experience, his stops included the FBI, U.S. Agency for International Development, and the Department of Justice. He worked abroad in Costa Rica and El Salvador and stateside at the DOJ's Los Angeles field office. He's an author as well. He wrote the book A Cop's Son, One G-Man's Fight Against Jihad, Global Fraud, and the Cartels. He is retired Special Agent in Charge and Assistant Special Agent in Charge Ken Strange, and he joins me now for this Volume 5 of The Beat, Profiles of Police Nationwide. Ken, welcome. How are you?
Hey, thanks, Mike. I'm glad you arrived safe and sound.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, like I said, going the speed limit, I might have went 5-10 over looking around to see if there are any cops around, but there weren't. So I made it. So first things first, you were the son of a very decorated and highly regarded NYPD chief. And when I put out the promo of the show, there was actually somebody, my friend Ken Bowen of the Emergency Service Unit, who remembered your father. So tell me about what it was like growing up with, as you said on my friends Tom Smith and Dan Murphy show, The Gold Shields, with a policeman in the house.
Yeah, I was in a world of police officers, and I felt very comfortable in that world. I would go with my dad to pick up paychecks at at a police precinct, and go to police barbecues and softball games, and they'd even ask me to play once in a while. Stick the kid out in right field. And so I got to know them. Also got to visit some of the motorcycle cops who had taken spills that had, been injured on the job when my father was with the motorcycle. So this was the world of the police and my world, and it was a good world. These were the good guys, and so they were really my role models. To be frank with you.
It's interesting because your career went the federal route. When you were originally contemplating what you were going to do, back then there was the NYPD, the housing police, the transit police. Did you try, even if it was Nassau and Suffolk County, also great agencies in their own right, did you try for local law enforcement in the New York City area?
No, I did not. In fact, I was looking at another career. I had teaching in mind. I actually, my major in college was Spanish, and I had lived overseas in Madrid, Spain, and got my teaching certificates, and so I was interested in going that route. And in fact, right after college, I ended up teaching Spanish at LaSalle Military Academy on Long Island, Oakdale, Long Island, for 2 years. So I was going in a totally different direction. Although always in the back of my mind, Mike, I thought to myself, keep that in mind, keep law enforcement in mind, because there was this kind of whisper that said, hey, don't give up on law enforcement. Maybe it'll come back to you or something. So it's in the back of my mind.
Oh, there you go. And then comes the opportunity, and it's not easy, but it definitely takes a lot of guts to try out for it, and you did, and that's getting into the FBI in 1989. Now it's a process. You have Quantico down in Virginia. It's extensive training, much like it is to be a firefighter, much like it is to be a police officer. Difference is this is on the federal level, and it's a premier agency, one of the most recognizable, not just in this country, but in the world. How did the process to first even be interested in the Bureau come about? And tell me about the process to applying and subsequently getting on.
Yes, so I mean, it's kind of it was a real journey, if you will. And I mean, so after LaSalle Military Academy, all of a sudden I'm in Saudi Arabia. I'm teaching for 5 years, but I'm not teaching Spanish. I'm teaching English as a second language. So, and this, believe it or not, I was with the royal family. I'm at a school for the royal family in Riyadh. So after 5 years, I come back to the States, and I go out to Thunderbird School of Global Management. I get an MBA, and while I'm getting this advanced degree, the FBI came calling to the school, and there was I remember it was a Mormon FBI agent, and he was talking to me, and he said, "We're looking for people like you who have got some language skills. You speak Spanish, you lived overseas in the Middle East, you speak some basic Arabic, so you should give it some thought." And he said to me, and I'll never forget this. He said, "You're never going to get rich by going into the federal government, but you won't get poor either." Kind of remember that. And so I put in my application, and because I had worked overseas for a number of years, it was a very lengthy process for me, because they had to vet all of people that knew me, not only in New York, but in other places I had lived, including Spain and Saudi Arabia and places like that.
Especially a hotbed like Saudi Arabia, which was a hotbed then, would become more of a hotbed throughout the 90s. I can see why.
Absolutely. And, it's interesting you say that, because, I would go to school, to this school of the royal family, Madrasa Riyadh, it was named. And there would be signs for Bin Laden construction.
Right,
And you just took it for granted. And I remember asking my colleagues, who's that? I see the signs everywhere. And, they said, oh, that's, he ingratiated himself with the king, with the monarchy. And, the family is from Yemen, but he has many wives and he has many companies, and he's a billionaire. And who would have thought, years later, what would come out of the Bin Laden name?
Yeah. I first heard of that. John Miller, who was previously the NYPD Deputy Commissioner of Intelligence Counterterrorism, friend of mine, been a guest on the show previously on the 100th episode few years back. When he did that interview with bin Laden in 1998, that's the first thing he mentioned at the top of his report, that his family were essentially construction tycoons, which is a big part of the reason, even though they said they cut him off, he was still able to get a lot of funding as a result.
Absolutely. In fact, I think his father had been involved in the construction of the mosque in Mecca, big mosque.
Right.
So yeah, it was really a wealthy family.
Of course, and we saw, unfortunately, what he put that money to use for. So the FBI in 1989, speaking of terrorism, your first stop out of Quantico, actually, before I get to that, tell me about Quantico, because it's something I haven't heard too much about. I've heard, of course, about the FDNY Academy, NYPD Academy, but this is the famed school where some of the best federal agents that have ever worked for the Bureau have been brought out of. So for you, tell me about that process.
That was a very interesting experience. I got accepted to try out to go to Quantico, and I arrived with. I remember flying to, I guess, National Airport, and there was a bus waiting for a lot of us, and we jumped on the bus, and the next thing you know, we're in Quantico. A lot of great, young men and women that were with me from all over the country, and I was very impressed by their intellect, by their attitude was excellent. So I knew that I had to be at the top of my game in this place. I just wasn't going to, just kind of ho hum get my way through it. No way. The actual testing to pass the physical part of it was a bit tough for me, especially with pull-ups and the run as well. Actually, I had just been a banker in New York City, and I guess I had too many bankers' lunches, and so I wasn't in tip-top shape. And so that first test, when I ran that 2 miles, it certainly sank in. I'm going to really have to improve if I want to pass.
Right. No, of course, because even if you're not chasing suspects on the street like a patrol cop, hand-to-hand combat is something that any law enforcement personnel can encounter at any given time. So it's imperative. It's imperative, and that's the thing that I heard this recently, because the fire department I work for as an administrative assistant, we just had 8 new recruits enter, and one of the things our senior chiefs told them was, when you leave the academy, you're going to be in the best shape of your life. Build on that. Continue that. And I'm glad to see that's true for every single academy. Quantico is no different.
Yeah, Mike, I dropped about 10 pounds while I was there. I was in the best shape of my life. I weighed in, I think, at 207 or something, and I'm not 207 anymore.
208.
There you go. Close.
So out of Quantico, we retired Special Agent Ken Strange. This is volume 5 of the Beat, Profiles of Police Nationwide, which, like I said, applies to federal law enforcement just as much as it does local. There is part of you, I'm sure, that's saying, wow, I'm in the FBI. But given your roots in New York, did you want the New York field office, or did you not care?
That's a great question. I absolutely wanted New York because it was a high-profile place. There was a lot happening there, from terrorism to Soviet, foreign counterintelligence, Russian spies. So it was kind of a flagship place. And so when I put in for it, when I did not get it, and instead I got Newark, New Jersey. I was so disappointed. I guess for a few minutes I thought, I'm going to quit. I'm not going to Newark, New Jersey. I already live in New Jersey. I was living in North Plainfield at the time. But Mike, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. The best thing. Because had I gone to New York, I would have been kind of lost in the crowd with a lot of agents. I most likely would have been assigned to the applicant squad, where you go around for a year interviewing people that are applying for the FBI or for federal jobs, as kind of to break in, to kind of break into that, to interviewing, things like that. However, when I got to Newark, it was small enough, and someone said, hey, wait, I saw your resume. You came from the Middle East, you speak some Arabic, you're bilingual in Spanish. Hey, how about the JTTF? How does that sound? And I said, oh, I am so there. Absolutely. Let's do it. And that's where I ended up, on the C10 squad, the JTTF, which was an incredible squad.
And right at this time, and this is where I can segue into it now, the JTTF is now in the eye of the storm because the 90s essentially kickstarted the war from abroad. There had been domestic terrorism in the United States, certainly throughout the 70s and 80s. Numerous radical groups bombed various places in New York City. But now is where you're starting to see the threat from the Middle East. In 1990 is when Meir Kahane is assassinated in Manhattan. Some of the players involved in that, E.I. Ismail,
Right.
El Sayed Nosair, who would later be involved in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, were involved in that particular assassination. And the guy that pulled the trigger was Nosair. And some of these guys were based out of Jersey City. So with that investigation, here is a grand slam of a case, for lack of a better way to put it. And you've only been in the Bureau a year. Tell me about your involvement, if any, in that.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm just going to back up for a second. When you said, it was the kind of the era of terrorism. When I got to C10, they were working on so many things, and there was so many moving parts. We had the New Jersey State Trooper on our squad had arrested the Japanese Red Army bomber Yu Kikamura on the turnpike, who
Wow.
had a bomb in his car and was headed to Times Square to put the bomb in a U.S. Naval recruiting station.
Oh, my
So
goodness.
Bob Saplinsky, he was on our squad, and so they were working that case. That was a big one. We also had Joanne Chesimar. She was with the Black Liberation Army. She'd gotten into a gunfight with our people. We also had state troopers on C10. One of their guys was killed, Werner Foster.
Yep.
That hurt. That really stung, and I could feel the pain, from the troopers on our squad. It was, I mean, we had Abu Nidal, IRA, Sikh terrorism, JDL, PLO, you name it. It was the candy store of terrorism. And that's kind of the environment I was in. And this C10 squad, diverse squad, but they had a swagger and a confidence that, they just oozed it. And I thought, I better be at the top of my game here. This is a very competent squad. They're in a lot of, a lot of stuff.
Oh, of course. And I'm glad you brought up the other groups involved, because even as the domestic groups started to die down, I'm glad you mentioned, for example, the IRA, the troubles is going on. And what does New York and New Jersey have? A heavy Irish population. Now, is that to say that every person from the Irish community is involved in that? Of course not. But you have, like with any community, there's bad people in every community. So you have people involved in that, maybe even some of the Brits that were trying to advocate for their side of the cause too. So that's another layer to it. And right after Kahane, we get the Gulf War, of which you were an Iraq desk officer in 1991, a conflict that gets lost to time because of other conflicts that have since ensued in the Middle East. But this one was one that really tested the mettle of what the U.S. Army and other forces were capable of doing. Saddam Hussein took things a step too far, and the H.W. Bush administration decided to intervene. Now, for those that may not be familiar with the term, when this conflict erupted, and boy, did it erupt in 1990, 1991, right at the end of the Cold War, what was the exact role of a quote-unquote Iraq desk officer,
Right. I mean, so you're monitoring people that are of that bent, that are from that part of the world. You're keeping your eyes on them. You are cultivating sources, informants that will, can work the streets and, have their ear to the ground and try to find information, actionable type information that you can work with. So, we were just a few, there were just a few of us, and there was a lot to cover. We had a sizable Middle Eastern population in Jersey City, also in Paterson, Clifton. And so, it was basically keeping your eyes on and listening for, people that had taken trips to Iraq, going through Jordan. You had to, and we're actually friendly with we had good relations with the Jordanian. They're kind of equivalent of the FBI. So we had good relations with them.
Mm-hmm.
But again, we would just, monitoring, surveilling people that might pose a threat, because Saddam had, we had heard, through the grapevine that he was hoping that some of the Middle Eastern population in Detroit and in New Jersey would kind of rise up and do things, maybe foment bombings or whatever. So that kept us pretty busy.
And it's interesting because it's fragmented. And I read this in Peter Lance's 1,000 Years for Revenge, which came out in 2003, a couple years after 9/11, in which he said, and it's ironic, Saddam Hussein is wanting that. And yet you have people like Omar Abdel Rahman, the blind sheikh, who also had some affiliations in New Jersey, and Osama bin Laden, that hated Saddam Hussein, that were completely on the polar opposite of the viewpoints. They both shared a hatred for America, but they personally did not like one another. So it goes to show the mission of the TTF is complicated, not in a bad way, but in the sense of you have to monitor different threats, and that even though you have people that share that hatred for the U.S., their motivations may be different. So, like you said earlier, you really got to be on top of your game.
You really do. And you're working during the Gulf War, and all of a sudden something from the Sikhs comes up,
Mm-hmm.
and there may be a terrorism act, and this person wants to talk to you, so you have to put everything on hold and respond to that, and what is this all about, and explain what's happening, and then only to find out that it's really in their temple, it's really a fight for control or power, the old school and the young Turks, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So, you have to say, okay, well, listen, guys, play nice. I have to go back to work now. So, all of these things happening. But, the thing that really helped me was resources. And you couldn't live, the old saying, can't live with them, you can't live without them.
Right.
You certainly can't live without them. That's
right.
For sure.
Oh, of course, it's essential in any form of law enforcement. Talking with Special Agent Ken Strange, Volume 5 of the Beat Profiles of Police Nationwide. Let me take a second to shout out those tuning in tonight. Billy Ryan, of course, who sponsors the show. Jay Driscoll from across the pond. It's just after 2 a.m. over there, Jay. Go to bed. I appreciate you staying up for me, but get some rest, brother. Howard Blank, retired NYPD Taru detective. He'll be on the show next month. Ted Hakes tuning in via LinkedIn. He says, good evening, Howard, Mike, and Ken. In reference to Howard Blank, of course, and Pylon Blue, also known as my boy Kevin Ramirez. He's watching tonight. He contributed in the super chat. Thanks, Kev. Love the show. Keep it up. Thank you, buddy. Good seeing you earlier, and I'll see you tomorrow, my brother. So right at this time, this is right before you left the FBI for USAID, as we'll talk about momentarily. There comes a threat towards the president, which I believe is still H.W. Bush at the time.
That's
right before Clinton comes into office in 1993. Now, again, you can never minimize a threat to any public official, especially the President of the United States. This is still it's under 30 years since the JFK assassination, under 25 years since the RFK assassination. So suffice to say, you guys keep an eye on stuff like this. Tell me about who this individual was and the joint effort, I should say, to stop him.
Right. Well, we really didn't know who he was, and that was the reason why we had to roll very quickly and to identify the person and see if he posed a threat, and if so, what kind of threat. So, it was very quick. I remember that, I think it was very close. I think it was in Rutherford, and he had a store, something like that. And the next thing you know, I'm there doing this kind of a limited undercover role, just kind of assessing who he is, making contact with him. And, I guess my cover was I'm some graduate student who's studying Arabic, so I could kind of pull that off. And I'd been in the Middle East for 5 years, so I could chit chat with anybody. So I got to meet him. We chit chatted. Of course, I'm asking him a ton of questions, all the while trying to make an assessment. I'm looking around his store, looking for weapons, looking for Confederates, anything like that. And it turned out that he was Palestinian, but had lived in Kuwait for many years, and he was not happy with the United States for backing Kuwait instead of Iraq. He was very pro-Iraq, so he had a chip on his shoulder about that. But he was also a former U.S. military. I think he served in Fort Benning. He was with the Army. So all of that, we processed, and so I went back to the squad. I said, hey, here's the deal. Here's what I can see right off the bat. And then from there, it went into high gear. All of a sudden, there was surveillance on him 24/7 for the next several months. And I write about that. There's a chapter called Crow's Nest, where we did the surveillance of his place, and we were rotating people in and out 24/7. So we took this very, very seriously. Plus, we had a Secret Service agent on our squad, so that was very helpful. It's a threat against the president. So,
You guys were ahead of your time, because think about something that's a major concern now in the counterterrorism efforts: lone wolves. You still focus on cells. You certainly still focus on organizations like ISIS, for example, Al Qaeda, the Taliban. But lone wolves have carried out attacks in recent years that, if they're not directly affiliated, they are inspired by, unfortunately, the hateful ideology. So to monitor someone like that, hey, it laid the groundwork for what the agents are doing now.
And Mike, I should say, just to kind of, I think the downfall of this fella was we had an undercover guy who was, raised in the Middle East, spoke fluent Arabic, had been to Iraq, been to Kuwait, all these places. So we kind of inserted him into the equation, and then the next thing you know, they're meeting, they're taping, and this was his name was Dimitri, and he's written a book or two. He's been in the Smithsonian Magazine, but once Dimitri came to the office and they said, well, we'll take it from here, I knew that guy was finished, because he had such a reputation of,
Right.
taking bad guys out, with his undercover roles. I understand now he's writing children's books, which is kind of interesting after all the things he's done.
Hey, he's an artist. What can you say? Maybe he should come on the show. I see Sam Snyder in the chat. Sam's a retired Washington police captain in DC, speaking of Washington. So, Sam, hey, you should come on the show too. We've been connected on LinkedIn a while, my brother. So email me a timeline of your career, because I do want to get you on and get your perspective. This is Volume 5 of The Beat. Our guest tonight, retired Special Agent Ken Strange. I should mention, before we get to your transition to the Agency for International Development in 1992, right below the surface, right as the Middle Eastern threat is evolving, you still have the Cubans. Tensions with Fidel Castro's Cuba is still burning hot. So tell me about counterintelligence for them, because if I remember correctly, a friend of mine from the bomb squad informed me of this. They had a center for a while in Manhattan that was basically their FBI, their CIA, if you will, where they were having intelligence operations done right in the heart of the city.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm not surprised. Of course, in New Jersey, over in Union City, those places, it's I think the second largest Cuban population in the country after Miami. So now I was kind of an alternate agent for Cuban intelligence matters. And our primary guy was a fellow from Puerto Rico, U.S. military background, and he was very competent at what he did. So I spent most of my time doing Middle East terrorism, but towards the end there, he was busy doing something else, and I got plugged into a fellow that kind of walked in and said, I have amazing contacts in Cuba, and he did. He had some amazing contacts.
Yeah.
But, I'm not going to get. I have to protect sources
Right, that's fine.
and methods, but I'm just going to say this: it was right into the top, right into the top. It was, for me, amazing, just amazing. Yeah.
Oh, incredible, of course. And we don't want two FBI agents showing up to my door, Mike. So about this podcast, to which I will then croak of a heart attack. So David Salzman in the chat, $5. Thank you. A great show, Mike. The FBI must be following a bunch of Russians today. Well, yeah, I'm sure they are. It's evolved over the years. Russians, Cubans, Middle Eastern. You can never stop monitoring these threats, as I'm sure you can attest to, my friend.
Yes.
Of course. So that brings us into 1992, moving ahead to the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, as it's also known. Now, people, unless they're really law enforcement buffs, and I consider myself to be one, but even I didn't know about this agency until we came in contact. People are familiar with the DOJ, certainly the FBI, CIA, ATF, so on and so forth, DEA. But USAID, what exactly is their function?
Yeah, so they administer the humanitarian assistance, and they're into public health care overseas to countries that are in need of it, and they're also into fostering democratic governance, food for the poor, and all of these programs. I mean, there's a myriad number of programs that they're involved in. So we were the Office of Inspector General, and we're monitoring all of our AID employees and these programs. Particularly for fraud, and that was our role. It was an elite fraud unit, and it was basically made up of former FBI agents and some IRS CID agents as well. So I had no background in fraud. The people that brought me on board, who were FBI, said no problem. your skill is in interviewing, and that's what we need you for, and we'll teach you the fraud part. And they did. And these guys were some of the best fraud people I'd ever met.
I can imagine. You spent 6 years there, the majority of the 90s in USAID. But let's go back for a second. Here you are, you're on the JTTF and the FBI. It's going great. You're 3 years in. You're hitting the ground running. Was it a hard decision to, even though you had a lot of FBI and IRS, as you just said, on that specific agency in USAID, was it a hard decision to leave the Bureau?
It was. It was almost kind of, for me, an agonizing decision because, again, I was kind of hitting my paces with JTTF, and we had done some incredible work. And I remember that this took place. I was kind of approached during this lull after the Gulf War by these FBI guys. So, here were former FBI agents, so I kind of trusted them. And but again, my background had been overseas, and they were telling me, and the Assistant Inspector General said, "Hey, I'll get you overseas within 2 years. You learn the stuff stateside out of DC, and I'll make sure you're overseas in 2 years." And that's what happened. I got to Latin America.
Of course, which is where you specialized in, of course, given your background in Spanish, as we talked about at the top of the show. Now, I think most Americans are familiar with certain aspects of fraud acts. We hear it all the time, especially when it comes to taxes, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, what can get you in hot water and what can't, per se. But it wasn't until I was doing my research on you, my friend, where I saw just how much it entails for companies and for individuals alike, and the kind of things that people will do to make a quick buck, unfortunately. So one of the things that you had in your career was a contracting firm in violation of the Procurement Integrity Act, as it's called. Now, before we get into this specific case, just give me a general synopsis on what exactly the Procurement Integrity Act even is.
Right. Well, I mean, it's it's a statute that protects procurements and protects the integrity of procurements and contracting. And in this particular case, we had a contract officer who was involved in a healthcare project, and all of a sudden he's playing footsies with one of the competing contractors, and he's talking about they engage in employment negotiations, while he is still taking care of this project. So that's a no-no. There's like a and then he accepts it without telling AID that he's accepted the job. And there's like a 2-year ban on this type of post-employment. So he completely ignored that. And then he didn't tell AID what he was doing. And then he should have recused himself once he got to the company that's competing on this contract that he had actually created. He's actually a part of the negotiation strategies behind the scene. So we had a whistleblower that came to us and said, this is what's happening out there. You should check it out. So we had subpoena power, and it was a civil case. And the next thing we're going through all these documents, and there were about 5 or 6 boxes. I went through 5 boxes, nothing, and then the 6th box, I found 2 documents that were kind of smoking gun documents. Where he's saying, "Oh no, I recused myself. I had nothing to do." But there were 2 documents with his name on it, where he's talking about strategies for this particular procurement. So it was kind of like, "No, you have nothing." We're sitting across from his lawyer. "You sure you have nothing to do with it?" And then we show him the memos, and it was all over. So this was the first Procurement Integrity Act of its kind in the United States, and it put teeth into this into procurements all over the country, and the company had to pay $400,000 in fines, and they had to install a ethics program as well. So in the end, it was all good, and that company is still out there doing business, but they're doing it in the correct way.
Of course, it steered the ship in the right direction for generations to come, and it's interesting. And now, as we talk about the function of the USAID, contractors are tricky to keep hold of, in that they're kind of guns for hire, quite literally. They're winds in the night, if you will, and that it's not like a company that's filing a specific tax form or employees of an agency in which their tax forms will be a W-2. These are 1099s. There might be other factors too. So sometimes funds can get lost in the wind, and people might think they might get one over on the government. And whatever the disdain for the government might be, or whatever the desire for wealth might be, laws are laws. And that's why it's important to have an act like that in the first place and look at the benefits. Like you said, they're still in business, but as you said at the end, they're doing it the correct way. And that's a good thing. And that's a good thing. And speaking of corruption, of course, corruption always seems to start at the top. A fish rots from the head down, as the old saying goes. And next up on a list of cases you had with the USAID was a crooked CEO who was in violation of specifically the commodity import program. Now, I think that law speaks for itself.
Right. Yes. I mean, this was perpetrated by actually a billionaire in Egypt, and he kind of created the whole the bunch of shell companies, which the product was acrylic yarn, and it was brought to our attention because there was some source origin violations that our auditors picked up, and then that kind of led us to look at some documents, and we noticed that some of the bidders on this particular contract, I think it was for acrylic yarn, it was $3.1 million. But some of the letterhead from the suppliers, the pro forma invoices, we noticed that some of the phone numbers were the same for all three companies. So there was no competition, and he had arranged it that way. The company that ended up winning the bid and then supplying the acrylic yarn to this Egyptian company, and so again, all of it was directed by this billionaire who simply picked up the phone and said, "Look, I want to get involved in this commodity import program. I need 3 pro formas. Just use my shell companies and make it happen." And so, I showed up, and I'm talking to the controller, and he's like, "Hey, I'm honest. I go to a religious school. I got a degree in religion, and I'll tell you the truth." So, he spills the beans. I'm flying out to LA. Hey, that's not a company. It's just a closet with his name on it. I'm in Atlanta, and all of a sudden, oh yeah, we're related to the guy that's actually, selling the product, actually buying the product. So they were all connected, and this guy he just created this one sham procurement, and so it was, and then they, of course, he's a billionaire, so he had the best attorneys that Washington D.C. could provide, but we had a little surprise for him of our own, and that was the assistant U.S. attorney from South Carolina. He was one of the best in the business, and this guy could play cards. He knew, he held them tight, and the other side blinked, and so they said, "Hey, we want to throw in the towel," So he said, "That's fine. It's that's a felony, and you owe us $500,000, and we're going to have to debar one of your companies," and that's how it played out.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, with these billionaires, they get what's called screw you money, to where they think they can do anything. And as a result, you put something like this together to where, as you said, the company is merely a closet. And as a result, people get hurt. They think it's a victimless crime. Not so fast. People do get defrauded. This term gets thrown around a lot, primarily for stock fraud. But would you say it applies here in that term being pump and dump? Was this the equivalent of a pump and dump?
I think it's a little bit different. It's a shell game. This was a definite shell game, and these were just companies that just in name only, just to perpetrate this fraud.
Of course. And of course, that's where AID comes in to stop it. Now, we talked earlier about you going overseas, your specialty being Spanish primarily, with the mix of Arabic too. And now you're in Latin America for multiple investigations in El Salvador and también Nicaragua. So tell me about going abroad to those 2 respective countries.
Well, in El Salvador, they had a micro enterprise loan program for women, mostly women, and in this case, several of the women absconded with, I think it was close to $1 million. So, off we went looking for these people. They had actually fled the country, and I was able to find one of the one of these ladies in Las Vegas, of all places. And,
Fitting.
she was, and believe it or not, she was a maid. She had been, she got there and she was a maid at I think one of the casinos, something like that. So, this was a case where we, working with the Salvadoran authorities, they made several arrests, and of course we couldn't get any money back from these women. They had spent it or hid it or something. But that case resolved itself. And actually, we went after the an audit, some of the auditors that had actually given this program a clean bill of health. So they were on the hook for that as well. And then so they had to compensate us with a fine as well. So that was one program. The other one, which is probably a fascinating case for me, was and it wasn't criminal, and it was actually just finding out that it was not criminal. You exonerate people just as soon as you would convict them, right? So they sent me to there was this was in the Mosquito Coast, indigenous peoples, and they had a grant from AID and from some other donors. And the press in Nicaragua said that the U.S. Embassy was, kind of squirreling away some funds. They weren't getting to the people, and there may have been corruption or an embezzlement going on. So they they flew me from Costa Rica to Managua, and then from Managua in this little plane to Puerto Cabezas, and then up the coast in a dugout canoe with, motorized canoe to a place called Sandy Bay. I did a number of interviews in Puerto Cabezas, and it turned out that it was more a case where the NGO that was involved, it was a Florida NGO, was actually using some of these monies to bolster another grant that they had. They had cost overruns, and they were borrowing from this grant, and so that's where percolated this kind of these rumors that there was embezzlement afoot. So that wasn't the case. They had actually borrowed the funds, and they returned the funds to this particular project. But we didn't uncover any fraud. The CEO of this company, the Florida company, was fired as a result. And politically, and because again, this was all new. The U.S. was just back into the game in Nicaragua, so it was a real high-profile case. And we were able to kind of calm everyone down. This is what happened. I went to the Nicaraguans, to their government, to their people that were receiving the funds, and I said, "Here's our report. Here's what we know." So no embezzlement, no fraud, but it was just a fascinating case because I was in places where it was like virtually the Stone Age, and when the sun went down, you lit a candle and then you went to bed. It was just so primitive, very primitive.
I can imagine. Let's stay on that for a second, because this is interesting for anybody that's been an attaché or has investigations that take them abroad. And that when you're in the U.S. conducting these investigations, you're in your backyard, you're in your territory, your home field. But now take that overseas, and it doesn't matter what government you're representing, you're out of your jurisdiction in the sense that you're in another government's place of range. And as a result, to an extent, you do have to play by their rules. And that's tricky when you have a country like Nicaragua, which at that time, there were tensions as a result of the Noriega years. So you have to tread lightly while still getting the job done. So in a situation like that, where you're far from home and you got to play ball to a degree, tell me about how you function overseas.
Well, I think a lot of it is, being an American carries some currency, okay? Because again, people overseas have seen American TVs and movies. So, there's, at least when I was working, there was a tendency to, cut the Americans a break. And so if you were genuine and you spoke their language and they would appreciate you. And I think, they would do you a favor, give you what you needed. So it wasn't that bad, but it was the elements that you were in, going up to Sandy Bay in a storm and, practically losing your life as the boat is taking in water. And, we have life vests on, and Do we abandon the boat? And no, not yet. We just need to come around this, the curve of this towards this lagoon, and we've made it. But these are the things that you have to live with, and just get used to while you're in that overseas environment. It can be harsh, but I would say just being genuine, being honest, it helped me a great deal.
Well, of course, humility goes a long way as well. It certainly seems like you had that. And if you're willing, like you said, to speak their language to a degree within the proper guidelines, it's going to go a long way, not just for that particular investigation you have, but for any future ones that may arise. Somebody you treat well, what do they become? An ally.
Right. Absolutely. In fact, they wanted, there was one humorous thing that took place when I met a Nicaraguan judge, and there was some type of an agent, and they started talking to me, and they said, "Hey, we love your president. We love John Kennedy, this and that." And they said, "Oh, can we make you an honorary deputy? Please, we'll get a Bible. We'll get a Bible. Put your hand, swear here. We'll make you a Nicaraguan deputy. You're a cool guy." I mean, just these funny things that would happen along the way. But Mosquito Land was a very unique place, and they had a lot of they had foreign fishing fleets coming in and stealing their fish. The Colombians were sending cocaine and bartering that for lobsters from the Mosquito people. So there were a lot of things going on out there.
A lot of things to keep track of. And that's just it. 1998, by this point, 6 years, seems like you're having a great time. I'll ask you a similar question to what I asked earlier in regards to the FBI. The DOJ is the DOJ. Don't get me wrong. It's hard to pass that up. But still, there's that pull. You're having a good time in AID. So was it equally hard to leave AID, or this time around, was it an easier decision?
It was a far easier decision. I had come to a point with that group where I felt that I wasn't going to. I didn't have a rabbi that I could depend on, someone I could emulate. In fact, it looked like, this particular office was going the other way. Mm-hmm. So somebody threw a life vest out to me, lifesaver, and said, "Hey, we need a bilingual guy on the border with the Department of Justice. You're just what we're looking for. Would you work with us?" And so it was and again, this person said, "And there is advancement in this unit, I promise you, if you do good work." So it wasn't that hard to leave, to be honest with you.
And you went to the El Paso office in Texas, heavy Hispanic population, not too far from the Mexican-American border. And, the DOJ scope is so wide in that they can have their tentacles in anything: fraud, counterterrorism, narcotics investigations, which is what makes it cool. So for you, being in El Paso at the time, and then later on Los Angeles, which I'll get to a little bit later, but first El Paso, where was your focus at that time?
Well, the focus was on any of the DOJ entities, any of the personnel or the programs that they were involved in. So, I would be working, for example, a Bureau of Prison cases, smuggling, sexual abuse, contraband cases, things of that nature. At the same time, I could be working a U.S. Marshals case. There was one, I think I may have shown you in my resume, detention officer who was, sexually assaulting some female prisoners. So, I'm working that case with the Marshals Internal Affairs, by the way. And then, various drug cases, corruption cases, where our gatekeepers were, taking money from the Vicente Carrillo Fuentes cartel, and working for several of those cells, and waving loads of marijuana at the time, or cocaine, across the border. So, we're working immigration. We had immigration at that time. We had Border Patrol, and Border Patrol, there was a lot going on with Border Patrol, and I mentioned U.S. Marshal Service and the BOP. So there was plenty of work. Plenty.
Of course, at that time, as the millennium, I should say, was fast approaching. And so let's stay on that, because you bring up an interesting case that you worked. And I don't know if you were still in the El Paso field office, and I apologize if I'm jumping ahead. But as you talked about with gatekeepers, right, there's nobody worse than someone who disgraces the badge. And in this case, it was 4 correctional officers that did just that, who had gone rogue, who had gone corrupt, who had become exactly what they were sworn to protect against.
Mhm.
So in that case, which I'm not sure which office you were in at the time, but tell me about bringing down that bad batch of 4 in this case.
Yeah, I mean that was in Los Angeles, and by that time I'm the special agent in charge of that office. Now the interesting thing here is at the time we also had jurisdiction of the and we still do, I guess, jurisdiction over the FBI itself. So they have an Office of Professional Responsibility, but if the agents do anything beyond that, then they call us in, for criminal type things. But in this case, because we were so small, sometimes we had to partner up with the bureau, with the FBI. So in this case, we worked with the FBI. They had 4 dirty correctional officers at the Metropolitan Detention Center in LA. And what they were doing is they were taking bribes, and they were, to the prisoners, giving them cell phones and cartons of cigarettes. And the currency in prison, in jail, are cigarettes, hooch, alcohol, stuff like that. So these were three of the current correctional officers, and one of the fellas had been doing it, but then he transferred to Homeland Security. But we ended up, taking them all down. But that was actually working in that case with the FBI in Los Angeles.
And again, it's scary to think these people are in your midst. But what's good is that most of the whistleblowers, most of the people that report this kind of conduct are your fellow agents, are your fellow police officers, which goes to show what, as something that we already know, the majority, 99.9%, value that integrity and will do anything to keep true to that integrity. And if it means they got to turn in one of their own, hey, good riddance. You know what you were getting yourself into. You knew what your oath was. And if you violated, we got no use for you.
Yeah, exactly. And in that whole arena of BOP, you would run into some real predators. Men that would prey on women, and you had to be careful too, because some women would also, devise a way of seducing some of the guards, and just so that they could get better treatment, or so you had to be careful.
Oh, yeah, that's a lot of temptation, but a moral code is important, and a moral code got a lot of these guys through. Now, let's backtrack for a second. El Paso, again, pretty large city in its own right, a lot to do there. You're definitely not bored, but LA is LA, and, every cop show or every prominent movie, if it's not being made in New York City, it's being made in Los Angeles. So when that opportunity came about, I mean, you probably said yes before the phone call was even over.
Yeah, this was the chance also to run my own office. So that was I put in, I got the job, and my wife's family was from Los Angeles. So, I had my time with my family on the East Coast. Now it was time for her family on the West Coast. But yes, it was very interesting. You're right there with Hollywood, and it was just it's a different vibe. It's the border, but it's not the border. It's away from the border. And there was a lot of work. And at this time now, we had jurisdiction of FBI and DEA as an ATF. As well.
Oh, wow. So a lot. All in conjunction. You got the guns with ATF. You got the explosives, too. You got the drugs with DEA, and then you got the wide scope with the FBI, of course. What year was this that you went to the LA field office?
So this was 2003 to 2010.
Okay, so the majority of your stint with the DOJ. Now, around this time, there was a corruption scandal in the Fairbanks as well, involving a mayor. Now, if I'm correct, and feel free to correct the record if I'm wrong, was this Jimmy Hayes who passed away recently?
Yes, absolutely the same Jim Hayes that just passed away. Yeah, he was a former Fairbanks mayor. I think he was in office for about 10 years.
Yep.
And he was the pastor of a church as well. So, but he and his wife Chris, also they had formed their own kind of charitable NGO called Love Services, and in it they were supposed to be taking the grant funds from us, DOJ, and from HUD, Housing and Urban Development. They were working off the 2 grants. And they were supposed to be using it for a youth center for disadvantaged youth in Fairbanks. So again, we had, I guess some people were looking at the paperwork, as they go through the grant, They're providing the paperwork, reconciliation, and we started to see a lot of checks for cash and unallowable costs. And some of the auditors came to us, DOJ auditors, and said, there's a lot of unallowable costs. We look at this as red flags, and there are a lot of these checks for cash. So when we dug in, we also found that there were people on their payroll that were not doing jobs. They were simply relatives that would pick up a paycheck, this type of thing. But the amazing thing was we had a prosecutor, a lady who was, I show up in Fairbanks and she says, come on, let's go. Let's do a drive-by. I want to do a drive-by, see where they live. And I'm like, wow, I am so on board with you. That's what we need, an aggressive prosecutor. So we do the drive-by and say, wow, for Fairbanks, that's a pretty nice chalet. And they got some nice luxury cars, but okay, fine. Maybe it's credit cards. How do we know? And so she says, let's go over to this youth center. And the youth center it needs a coat of paint. It's dilapidated. It's decrepit. It's sad. It's like no monies are going there. So then she says, hey, Ken, we should really check out, he's building a new church. And I said, yes, let's do that. And then when we saw the church, we both knew. I mean, this was a gorgeous church. So we, and what we did is, I like working with other agencies. I believe in collaboration. So I turned to the FBI in Fairbanks. I turned to the IRS. We had our agents, Housing and Urban Development had an agent as well. And so we worked this case jointly. And it was a fantastic case. And it got me into Fairbanks with 40-degree below weather at one time, where you could barely breathe. It would hurt so much. It would actually sting. And then, I was there on another trip during the summer, and the sun never went down, or it would go down and then come up a few minutes later. And so it was very hard to sleep. So I got to take a look at Alaska, especially that far north. But the case was amazing, and we actually got our auditor. It went to trial, of course. It went to trial, and we got our auditor up there to provide testimony. That had never been done, as far as I know, with DOJ, OIG, or even AID, OIG, to bring in auditors to give testimony. So I was very proud of that, and our guy did a great job. The agents did a great job. And finally, at the end of the day, they were both convicted for diversion of funds. She got 33 years. He got like 66 years or something like that. Very, very heavy sentences. But it was a very good effort. It was a team effort, and it was a memorable case.
Oh, that's for sure. That's for sure. Now, let's backtrack for a second, because 2003, when you get the LA office, by this point, it's about 14 years as a federal agent. And I'll ask you a similar question I asked Commissioner Bratton, our mutual friend, who was on my program a few episodes ago, where when he became the commissioner, if you will, or chief firstly of the New York City Transit Police, now I told him, okay, you're the guy that can affect change, because as you're ascending through the ranks, you're wondering, man, if I was in his position, I would do this. I wish we would do that. And now when you're the boss, oh, wait, yeah, I can do it now. So here you are with your own office, and you've learned so much from agents directly or indirectly. Here's how you should proceed. Here's how you should not proceed, to where now that you're the guy, that first goal or goals in 2003 upon assuming your own office, what were you looking to do based off that 14 years of experience, not just investigation-wise, but morale-wise, making sure you're taking care of your people?
Yeah, no, I mean, so what I did learn is that you do, like you said, you take care of your people, you express an interest in them, not just them, but their families as well. If we have little events, we include the families always. If somebody is not pulling their weight, you got to be honest with them and say, it's not happening. I'm going to give you several chances, but, if you can't do it, you're on a PIP program, performance improvement program. So, and the other thing is, for me, there were two things: communication, with them to me to them, to my people, and then just getting out and collaborating with the other agencies that we had jurisdiction, and sometimes, even the local police department in our own jurisdiction, Glendale PD or LAPD, and I would get out there and I would would hobnob with just about everybody I could, just to tell them that here's who we are, here's what we do, and I thought it worked pretty successfully. And I got a few people that to this day say, you were the best thing that ever happened to that office. So that's very nice to hear.
Oh, that's high praise. If you want to work for the guy or gal, there's nothing you won't do. You got certain bosses that you just can't wait till they retire. You got certain bosses that you would run through not just one brick wall, but two for them. And it seemed like you fit into the latter category.
And Mike, what's interesting is when I went out to Los Angeles, of course, these are people that have been working for somebody else. And so, they're watching you, and they're going to, once in a while, they're going to push your buttons, see how you react. So, you got to just, be very conscious of that. And what was nice is after a while, some of those people ended up retiring or moving on, or, I don't want to work here anymore. You're too tough, that type of thing. And then you could get your own people. And, I would go out and I'd look for talent. This kid does fraud in another agency, and he's looking he heard about our office, would like to join. You know what? I've looked at your resume. I've heard about you. I'd like you to work for me. And so I would pick these people, and all of a sudden I had this nice, great group of agents. And then what was tremendous was to watch their career and then to kind of groom them for promotion. And some of them went on to get their own offices, which makes me extremely proud of them.
Oh, of course. Yeah, you feel like a proud papa for sure. And when you're building a team like that, I'm a huge baseball fan, so I liken it to building a lineup. And we'll use the Dodgers as an example since you spent a lot of time out in Los Angeles. I love the way they build their team. Okay, here's a guy that has high contact. Here's a guy that hits for power. Here's a guy that walks a lot. And you mesh that together into what's a great lineup that meshes well. And that's why the Dodgers are great every year. Same thing with, any agency, but especially one in law enforcement. When you play to different strengths, when it comes together, it's a machine that functions at the highest level and one you cannot stop.
And I'm glad you said that, Mike, because you hit it just right. You really want to make those people succeed. And so you want to put them in give them the chance to succeed and really at their strength. Not their weakness. You don't want to expose the weakness. You really want to take the strength and push that.
Absolutely. I love that. You had an interesting case in Las Vegas I'll get to momentarily, but when you were coming into the office in 2003, we're 2 years removed from 9/11. You had prior counterterrorism experiences, of course, from your time on the JTTF. And any major city, not just New York City, was a target at this time. Tensions were still ripe. Another conflagration in the Middle East was just underway with the Iraq War. Later on, of course, invasion into Afghanistan and the commencement of that war, too. So as far as counterterrorism was concerned, how much was your office, without getting into specifics, involved in that, given the target LA can be?
We were not involved in counterterrorism at all. That just wasn't our purview,
Okay.
really. Unless there were agents in counterterrorism that had gone awry or that done misconduct, but no, we didn't have that jurisdiction.
Okay. A different function, nevertheless, but something I did want to ask about, given your ties to it. So thanks for clearing that up. But now to this case in Las Vegas, again, talking about misconduct, it plays perfectly. This is almost like a real life case of casino when I was reading through this case in your resume. Unfortunately, an FBI agent's ties to the outfit out there in Las Vegas and all that they were up to. So what did this case entail, and how were you able to bring this agent down?
So this agent, I believe he was out of the Las Vegas office, and he just got too close to people that were unsavory types, suspected mob types, and was compromised. We thought he was compromised in different situations with women, for example, at the casinos. So we kind of dug into what he was up to, and we took our case to the FBI and said, this guy is a disaster, and it could get a lot worse very quickly. And so the FBI took our report, everything we had written down in the report, and they said, we're going to fire the guy. We just have to get rid of him. So again, too close to the action, where he had forgotten that he was an FBI agent and wanted to be liked by these guys, by these mafia guys. They had nice cars, they had nice suits, they hung around with nice women. Of course, some of the women were available for this guy as well. So he just got too close to the flame, and it was good that we caught it in time before it got out of hand. And so they fired him immediately.
Tell me about the balancing act of these cases, because on one hand, you feel great that you were able to stop it in time and that you're able to keep, to a degree, federal law enforcement clean and catch these people in the act as they're violating their power. But on the other hand, was there a feeling of, my goodness, how the heck do these people even get out in the first place?
Yeah, no, there are some people that just somehow, they make it through, and they are who they are, and they have major character defects, and sometimes most of the rank and file, 99.9%, are fantastic, and they're competent, they're professional, they're amazing people. They've got your back, and I've got their back. But every once in a while, these people bubble up, or they get into some, they get compromised, and here's where the problem is. Many times, if they come clean, and when you're investigating them and say, hey, you know what, this is what I did, I'm not proud of it, I did it because of this whatever reason, but I'm acknowledging this, right? So they're not lying, they're not covering it up. The problem with a lot of these other agencies, these kind of bad apples that would surface, is that they would lie, and once they lie, it's over. That's they have no more credibility. And so, for example, with the FBI, I worked on several cases with some of their people, and had they only come clean and said, you know what, I screwed up, I did this, I shouldn't have done it, and maybe they survive. Maybe they're given time off, a few months off, or they're docked pay or something like that. Instead, because they lie and they cover it up, now they're fired, or worse. So, that's one thing that I did see from time to time, and it always hurt to see some of these people go down in flames.
I mean, it reminds us of a saying that you and I, I'm sure, were both taught when we were little, and was said to us many a time: the truth will set you free. It quite literally, in this case, will set you free. It'll keep you out of a jail cell, maybe even keep you in your job.
Exactly. Amen to that.
Yeah, of course. Of course, Los Angeles has a heavy, specifically Mexican Latino community, and there's other, of course, Hispanics in the area too, but Mexican specifically. You're also close to Mexico, like you said. You're close to the border, but not that close to other places in California, Arizona, Texas, and the like. And I imagine there were some initiatives and investigations in Mexico that your office had a role in, if I'm correct. So if there were, tell me about some of the things that most stand out about that.
Yeah, so I got involved in the Merida Initiative, and this was out of the U.S. government. This was giving the government of Mexico funding to combat the cartels and crime in Mexico, and part of that were programs that, and I got involved in one of these programs in this Merida Initiative to go over to Mexico City and to teach them about OIGs and how they work, and how they function, and how to write up code of conduct and things of that nature. So I spent a few weeks in Mexico City with their the PGR, their Attorney General's office, and the different components that they had of federal police officers. And so they were trying to come up with their own offices of Inspector General, and they wanted to know how we did it. And so I went down there with some attorneys, an attorney out of DC, plus myself, who was very familiar with OIGs. Right, I'd been with OIGs for years, and so we did some training, and that was phenomenal. Just great to see them wanting to do this, but it also was a wake-up call for me, because I knew that what they were up against was some pretty dangerous stuff. It was like plomo or plata for some of these guys. They would you take money, or you're dead. So I always felt bad. I knew some of them might not make it. Some of them might give in. Others could get whacked. So I always felt always worried about these guys, because I made some nice friendships with them, and one one friendship in particular resulted in the most wanted, one of the DEA's most wanted guys to be arrested.
Oh, let's talk about that. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so that was, again, I'd met a whole bunch of people, and now I'm back in California, and I got a call one night, and it was a bunch of these guys, and I think they were having some tequila or something. They were very happy, and they wanted me to have tequila with them, but I said I can't do that. I'm in LA. I'd love to, but I got a follow-up phone call from one of them, and he said, we have a very bad actor in my city, and here's what he's doing. And in fact, your DEA, he's on the most wanted program. And I know where he is, and I know how you guys can get him. So I said, hold that thought type thing. And so anyway, long story short, I had to go to my boss. We don't do capturing most wanted people. But my boss said, hey, take a little time, do your thing, help the DEA, and bring this guy to justice. But I'm just giving you a little time, okay? You have an office to run. And so it was very interesting. I collaborated with DEA, and we were able to work with this fella. And, it happened very quickly. I didn't think it was going to happen because at the time we were all in this, we were in some restaurant, and it just wasn't going anywhere. And, the Mexican guy wanted this, and the DEA wanted that. And I said, gentlemen, I got to go. I put you guys together. That's what I do best. I have to run an office. But by the time I got back to my office, the bad guy was taken down, and he was on a flight to Mexico City. It was that quick. It was that quick.
Teamwork makes teamwork makes the dream
right.
work.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then that was definitely true in this case. In 2010 is when, and granted, you're still active in the private investigations field, so you haven't fully stepped away. But as far as the federal law enforcement side of it, 21 years as a special agent between 3 agencies, you did a lot, both in the States and abroad. And then you retired. What was it that made you say in 2010, okay, I have done a lot. I've had a great career. I think it's time I move on to something else.
Yeah, no, great question. I had about 2 years left to go, but I got an offer with the Siemens company in Germany, and they were just opening a office in Mexico City, and they said we need someone to kind of initiate or get up and running an office, compliance investigations office that would cover their Latin America and their South America offices. So that sounded terrific to me because I was very comfortable in South America. And then, of course, I would have to actually bring on my own people, which I did. I mean, I got people from Argentina, Venezuela, other investigators who worked with me. And
Nice.
it was just a great experience. It was just what I needed. It was a private sector, and it was just a golden opportunity. And I was able to travel to Germany several times. I got caught up in stuff too with the FBI again. I just never seen. Anyway, that's another story, and I better not go there. But it's just interesting how that works.
Well, of course, you could leave the job, but the job never leaves you. And as long as you could stay active in some capacity in it, which you have, hey, it makes that transition a lot easier. Because, again, to quote a friend of mine from the bomb squad, Dan McNally, as he told me on the show a couple of years ago, retirement's a hard business. It's a full-time job.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's interesting. You stay in this game long enough, and there's some very unusual things that can happen.
Oh, yeah, that's understating it, my friend. Now, there's a lot of guys that come on that have had the type of careers that you've had, to where people say in their orbit, write a book, will you already? And, there's one friend of mine in the chat that I'm trying to get to do that, Billy Ryan, who should do that. And with that being said, you're the guy that actually wrote the book, based off your experiences and, of course, being the son of a cop, as we talked about. So as I ask any author, it's one thing to have these thoughts. It's one thing to jot them down, but to turn it into a book, especially as a first-time author, is not easy. But this was a passion project. So tell me about the process and getting it to that final result and the impact, and a very positive one at that this book has had.
Yeah, so it was not easy to get this book out there. Fortunately, I had started. I published my first book in 2019. It's Your Camino. It was a totally different genre. It's travel, adventure, spirituality. Okay, so it's totally different. But
Right.
I garnered several awards for that book, and that was enough to keep me going because I'd always wanted to write a true crime memoir. So that kind of encouraged me to go forward. And so I was writing those two books at the same time. Now, the problem was when I finished the manuscript, I had signed an agreement with the FBI that if I ever written anything, and this is what we all sign, that they have to look at it and they have to, to see if we're compromising any sources and methods. So the Bureau had my manuscript for 16 months, and they were very, they were, scrutinizing everything. Let me put it that way. Now, because there were, two other agencies involved, they had to pass that off after they were finished to the other stakeholders, which was AID, which was nothing. They had no comment. They said, nothing to hide here. And DOJ, OIG, maybe a handful, 3 or 4 things, and very minor. It was really the FBI, because I'd worked in the counterterrorism intelligence thing, that was very concerned about sources and methods. So it took a long time. And then, it was interesting, Mike, because some of the things I thought would fly right through, they took issue with it. And some of the things that I said, oh man, they're never going to go for this, they let through. So it was really crazy. And, I actually had to negotiate. They had actually gone into one of the stories and they had redacted it so much that it killed the story, but it brought me to do another story, just to make up for that story, which was Crow's Nest, with the secret, the fellow that threatened Bush. So that worked, but it was a long and tedious process. And, I was always anxious about the final results. So I was very happy. And then, I thought I was going to self-publish again. And another FBI agent who had his own book on Unabomber, and this is a guy you'd really want to interview.
I do.
Terry Turchi. And Terry said, hey, Ken, can I see your manuscript? Absolutely. So I sent it to him, and he called back in a few days, and he said, my God. He said, you can write. And I said, yeah, I know. I've been writing since I was a kid, since I was 11. I love writing, and he said, can I show my publisher your manuscript? I said, absolutely. So, another day or so passed, and then the publisher called me and said, hey, I want to sign a contract with you. And I'm like, oh, great, fine. I don't have to self-publish. So, I was able to get this book out. And, there's just some stories in this book that you're not going to see in other books, other true crime books, simply because of, the different agencies, the overseas and the domestic pieces. So, and these were stories I thought that really need to be told, what it's really like to be, hunting terrorists or, gaining success or failure, what it's like, screwing up. I wanted to make sure that people knew I screwed up in this, but, the honest truth, that they could take away the veil of this mysterious terrorism thing and what is it all about? What did you do? So I'm happy to get that out and to be transparent.
Was the primary objective, of course, having grandchildren now, was it the primary objective to show your children and your grandchildren, this is what my dad did, this is what my grandfather did? Was the primary objective a legacy book, if you will?
It was, yes. It was a legacy thing. I did, yeah, because my kids were always asking, what do you do? What do you do? And I couldn't tell them all the time what I did. So there was that. And I also wanted to, my father was a very understated civil servant, and he did wonderful things. And, I wanted him to be in my book too. And he was a huge inspiration for me for being a good guy and, following the right way. So, definitely legacy, and definitely I wanted the public to see some of what federal agents and law enforcement do.
You did a great job with that. I linked the book in the description for those that want to buy it. It's definitely on the top of my list of things that I need to read next. I got a few books I'm working on right now, and your book is at the top of my list, as I said, my friend. Before I get to the rapid fire, like I said, you are involved in the private investigations field. Tell me about some of the interesting things that you can discuss that you got going on right now, because you're still very much busy.
Right. So Mike, I've just kind of hung up my PI badge.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, to devote more time to writing. I
Mhm.
have another book about my Middle East experience that I'm halfway through. So I needed more time to do that. But I worked on two cases come to mind. One was a Hollywood case where the underlying message here for all of us is money corrupts. Um, People, celebrities who have a lot of money, some of them turn out to be very bad people and will just crush people and have no respect for other people. And I got caught up in one of these cases, and boy, it definitely popped my eyes wide open. So again, I work with, and we won the case, but however, just some celebrities are just, they think they're God. So that was a big wake up call for me. The other one was I liked finding people, missing persons, and one of them was a family. It was an older gentleman who was lost, and the parents. It was their only. Well, actually, they had two children, but he was the only son. So he had some mental issues, and he took off. So the parents were very worried about him. They called me. They said, "Hey, we heard about you. You do strange investigations." No pun intended. So I had this thing for a week, and I got to the very last person I needed to talk to, and I said, "Well, this case is over, and I guess I'm not going to be successful. He's gone." And so I called this person who had known him back in college years ago, and she said, "Yes, Mr. Strange, he just called me. He's going over to the Golden Gate Bridge, and he's going to jump off." And I said, "Whoa," So I scrambled. And listen, I said, "Keep in touch with him, call him back, discourage him. Help's on the way." And I called, the authorities over at the Golden Gate Bridge, and the guy. Fortunately, the guy didn't show up, and he ended up going back to this girl and staying with this girl until she could calm him down. And then the parents were able to come up, take him. They brought him back home, and they had 3 more months with their son. And then he went back out to the Golden Gate, and this time he jumped.
Oh,
So it was a heartbreaking case. I just remember the mother, after we got the son back to her, she said, "Mr. Strange, what do I do now?" And I said, "I don't know. That's not my job. I just found your son. I don't know what to tell you." So that was a heartbreaking experience. And I'm also working a case overseas. I don't need the PI, but this was my neighbor in New York that disappeared in Ireland in 1993. Annie McCarrick. She went missing. A whole bunch of other women went missing at about the same time, and it became called the Vanishing Triangle near Dublin to the Wicklow Mountains. So we've been looking for her for, I guess, over 30 years. Father has, again, the father was my teacher. The mother worked in my school. Annie McCarrick was my baby sister's friend. So we had this family relationship. And then, as an investigator, you want to try to find out and help the family. However, just about 6 months ago, the case was upgraded from a missing persons case to a murder case. So there's a glimmer of hope. Her father is long since passed away, broken heart. But the mother is, she's 83. And, she came up to me at church when I was in Long Island. After church, she said, "I know I'll never see her again, Ken, but could you help me bring her home?"
yeah.
Whew. So, we still hope, we hope the Irish police, people call me from time to time with leads and this and that, and I funnel them over to the Irish police where it should go.
Right.
So we're hoping that somebody will come forward, will know something, and we might be able to find her body.
Now, I for those of you that don't listen to the show, you should check out this episode. So I mentioned the Gold Shields earlier. I listened to that. Dan Murphy and Tom Smith do a great job. Dan Murphy's been on the show. Tom Smith will be on in November. Ken talked about this case at length in that specific episode that he did. Gold Shields is on YouTube. They're also on audio, Apple, Spotify, and the like. So if you want to go and listen to him talk about the specifics of Annie McCarrick, and that was a great episode, please do so. Again, the show is Gold Shields. And if you know anything, make sure, and the guys talk about this at the end of the episode, that you get those leads to the necessary forces in Ireland, or pass them along to Ken if you can, and he can pass them along, as he said, to the Irish police. Now, that brings us to rapid fire. The time has flown right by. It's been a heck of a show with you, my friend. It's 5 hit-and-run questions from me, 5 hit-and-run answers from you. You can say pass if you want. Are you ready?
Yeah, I guess so.
All right. First, funniest colleagues you ever worked with?
Yeah, there's one in particular, Agency for International Development, Office of Inspector General, Big Tony. We called him Big Tony. Big Tony was a former paratrooper, U.S. Army, FBI, a fraud expert. He kind of took me under his wing. We would go out for spaghetti. Big Tony is Italian, right? We'd go out for spaghetti lunches. He'd always wear a white shirt with a tie, and by the end of the meal, he was just covered in marinara sauce. But funniest guy you could ever meet, very opinionated, and he distrusted management like no one has ever distrusted management. It became funny. He would just complain. But he was probably one of the funniest people. And what my friend and I did to him is, he was divorced, and he was always saying, I need a woman. I need to find a wife. And so we put an ad in the paper. He was a hunter. Put an ad in the paper for him. And he was a hunter, and it said, looking for a female hunter, must be able to field dress a deer. And a woman popped up and said, "That's me. I'm a hunter. I field dress deer. Nice to meet you, Big Tony." And they got married. So the joke was on us.
Oh, my goodness.
On us in the end. Yeah, it was amazing. It was funny. Very funny.
Oh, that's quite the love story. That's amazing. That's one of the best stories I've heard. Second, best advice anyone ever gave you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was going back before the show. I was looking at going through my boxes, and I found a letter from my dad. Before I went to Quantico, he said, "Son, I've been there, done that, and I want to just give you a few pointers." And he said to me, keep your values, stay away from cynics. They'll poison you, and have a great attitude, and you go far. And it was interesting, as I was looking at that letter, I could hear his voice, and a little bit sentimental to go through that. But he was right on. He had some great advice, and that's the advice I would give to people as well.
And that's 40 years of police experience talking. So you better listen to it. Hey, that's not just for you, but for any cop out there. Hey, 40 years of police experience. You want to listen to what the man has to say.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Yeah, he knows a thing or three because he's seen a thing or three. Third, favorite cop show or cop movie?
Oh boy. So I'm a junkie with cop shows and cop movies. Barney Miller. Barney Miller was this sitcom, and I remember talking to my dad, and he said, "Ken, this is my precinct. It's the same. It's so funny. This is my precinct." So I got to love Barney Miller because of that. There was a show in the '60s called NYPD.
Yeah, short-lived, but very good. It's on YouTube.
Jack Warden, Frank Converse, great show. I mean, I'd watch every episode, and that was in the '60s. The best movies: French Connection, Academy Award, 5 Academy Awards, Best Picture, Best Actor, Gene Hackman, Roy Scheider, Fernando Rey. Phenomenal movie. And the other one is, I guess you could say Serpico was also good, but I really like Prince of the City by Steve Lumet with Treat Williams. That was dark, it was gritty, and it was it was raw. And It was an awesome movie.
Oh, of course. But I like Heat. I mean, I know it's not the most realistic thing in the world, but Heat with Al Pacino and Robert De Niro is one of the best cop movies I've ever seen, especially that exchange in the diner between De Niro and Pacino. You know, the
Yes.
dialogue is just, I still watch that scene anytime I have the opportunity to. I'm trying to think. I mean, The Departed was great as well. I love The Departed. I watched it years ago, haven't seen it in a long time. But as I always say, when it comes to cop movies, Rush Hour takes the cake for me. 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, those are great movies.
Oh yeah, no, it's amazing.
And I can't forget Dirty Harry movies too. We
Yeah.
used to memorize those lines. Me and my friends. Hey, punk, make my day. We have all the lines memorized. So some
Oh
good
yeah,
Clint Eastwood.
oh yeah. Well, same thing with me in Rush Hour. Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth? Lee, don't nobody understand the words coming out of your mouth. Fourth, favorite bar or restaurant in Los Angeles. Multiple answers are allowed here. You don't have to say one.
Right. Yeah. So I don't really spend much time in LA
Mhm.
because it's out of the way for me. It's some 30-something miles. There's a restaurant in Malibu, right on the beach, called the
Mhm.
Sunset. The Sunset, right on the beach. It's got sunsets to die for. I mean, it's great. Anytime I have people visit, I take them to the Sunset, right on Malibu Beach, by Point Dume. So that's one I would recommend. People would love that. And it's also, they've got a bar there, so I'd say that's my favorite bar and restaurant.
Yeah, there you go. Good combination. We talked about this earlier with your father in the letter he wrote you, but you can expand on it with your own thoughts too. And that's fifth and finally, any part of law enforcement, federal or local, what advice would you give anybody coming onto the job now based off your experiences and what you saw with your dad?
Yeah, so I mean, now policing is in a very interesting time. That, defunding the police. We're under the microscope. Law enforcement is under the microscope. So, you better, when you go into law enforcement, you better know what you're getting into. Not everybody is cut out for it. In Quantico, we had one lady that halfway through the program said, "I can't do it, don't want to do it. This is not what I wanted." And we actually gave her, she said, "Thank you, nice to meet you all." We gave her a standing, applause. So, know what you're getting into. Um, and and the things I mentioned before. Another thing also is, I mentioned this, alcohol. Never imbibe on duty. And if you do, want to have a drink off duty, make sure that you're not drinking to the point where you're impairing yourself and you can't respond to stuff at the office. That's you know that has come up. I've seen a lot of that as well. So I don't mean to end on that kind of a negative there, but
No, it's important. That's not a negative. Yeah. Drink responsibly.
yeah, there you go.
Have fun, but
Yeah.
drink responsibly.
There
Because
you
if something happens, hey, boss, what do you need? You don't want that. So be responsible.
Exactly.
This has been a great conversation with you. I highly enjoyed it. I was looking forward to it for a long time. When we scheduled it earlier in the summer, time flies. Is that it seems so far away, but here we are. September creeped up on us. So it was great that we were finally able to chat and stick around. We'll say our goodbyes off the air. But before I say goodbye to the audience, any shout outs to anyone or anything that you want to give?
Oh no, just to all my law enforcement brothers and sisters, I'll always have your six because I know you've got mine.
Excellent. Excellent. Likewise. Likewise. For those of you that may be in the city on Monday, the 11th, particularly my emergency service unit friends, I'll be at Truck 2 in Harlem for the breakfast that begins at 8 a.m. So for those of you in the area, if you want to swing by, I'll be there. You can say hello. We can meet up, and I'll be there on hand for that. I'll also be at Squad 288 in Queens that day, later on in the day, FDNY. If you want to say hi to me there, for those of you heading out there. Coming up next on the Mike Dean podcast, Volume 5 of The Beat was tonight. Volume 6 is coming up. He rose to the ranks of the Paramus, New Jersey Police Department, which at a time has 300,000 people, not counting the 100,000 residents that live there, with the 200,000 people coming through in transit. So it's a big beat for that particular department, and eventually becoming the chief of it. He would know, spent 29 years there. And that's James Sheehan, who joined me this Tuesday for Volume 6 of The Beat, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're back to our normal slot time this Tuesday. And then next Friday, of course, his last name's Ferrari, so he had to work an auto crime because why not? It has to happen. It's too good not to. Retired NYPD Detective Vic Ferrari. And that's Friday, next Friday, the 15th, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. In the meantime, this has been Volume 5 of The Beat with retired Special Agent Ken Strange. And on behalf of Agent Strange, I'm Mike Colón, and we will see you next time. Have a great weekend, everybody. Take care. Stay safe.